Hello, everybody. Um, Great to have you here with us on Zoom for this hour or so long talk with Michelle Parisi, CBC Edmonton. Very happy to be a sponsor of this event. So let's hear a little bit more about Michelle first. Michelle is an award-winning journalist, writer, and performer. She's worked for the CBC for more than 2 decades in everything from radio news, children's television, music programming, and at the helm of many national audio programs. She's also a soccer player, parent, and champion campfire builder. We'll ask her about that. Alone a Love Story is her first book. Prior to publication, she adapted it into a multi-award winning CBC podcast of the same name. It is my pleasure to introduce Michelle Parisi. Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
All right. Are you ready to jump in?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. There's a lot that struck me about your memoir. You were just so raw and revealing, and it was about the good stuff and the bad stuff. So did you always feel comfortable doing that? Or did you ever think, like, I can't tell the world this, I must be crazy?
Sure. Of course, a little bit of me was nervous, but I think that maybe it's just being Italian or whatever, but I'm really comfortable with expressing myself, and I do think there's a real value into expressing our the depth of what it is to be human, not just in the way that often human emotions and like our relationships and stuff, the way they're presented in popular culture or in literature even sometimes or anywhere, is very binary or very black and white. And I think it's very much more nuanced than that. And so it's always been important to me to be put my whole self into everything I do, not to be an exhibitionist, but to be like, it's a way of connecting with people. Like if you show your bad side and your good side, if you show your downs, not just this like beautiful veneer of, life, Instagram life or whatever, right? Like life is much more complicated than that.
Well, it's messy even, yeah. And you show your feelings go from 1 minute to the next can be really different. Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, the way it was written, I guess facilitates that, because it's written in an active voice for the most part. So unlike a lot of memoirs, I guess, it's not I didn't write it retrospectively. Like I didn't write it thinking back on the time. I wrote it as all the things were happening. And what I did after the fact was, put it together and shape it and maybe fix it up a little bit, but mostly I kept it true to the voice of myself in the moment that I wrote it. And so it has this sort of rawness. It does vacillate or oscillate. Oh, I always get those wrong. It does move quickly from one, emotion to the other, from one feeling to another, which is, I think, is very true of what it is to be a human being. I mean, we're very rarely consistent, especially when we're under duress or in a extremely stressful or period of grief, for example, as I am for a lot of the book. So it was important for me to like keep that voice, that confusing here, there voice, that person that probably when people read the book, and certainly when they listen to the podcast, would say like, oh, what's the matter with her? Like, why is she doing that? And that's because we're not always perfectly rational. We're not always making all the right decisions. We're not always coping very well. And it was really important for me to put that out there so that people don't feel alone, basically, because they're not. I think people think they are.
Yeah.
Right.
So you said you kind of wrote this as you went along, a lot of notes, you were journaling and all that sort of stuff. So did you know that this was going to be a book, this whole incident was going to be a book?
No, never. So ever since I was a little kid, I always wrote everything in little short stories. Like I would if people in my family, or I would overhear, you know, in the park or wherever, like funny dialogue, I would write it down in my notebooks. And it's still something I do today. Like I just have tons of notebooks of things other people said, like funny dialogue and exchange, or serious or whatever. And so I did have lots of these notes, like not traditional sort of like, it's not diaries. It's like research notes. Kind of, you know what I mean? I'm very much Harriet the Spy vibe, without the spying. You know what I mean? That was one of my favorite books as a kid, and maybe that's where I got it from. I don't know. But there's definitely that. So it's a lot of notes. And then, you know, the journalist in me is very detail oriented. So I have lots of calendars. I know the dates of everything. And when I wrote the book, I fact checked it like it was any other piece of journalism, even though I know it's not journalism, but I can't not do that. And I would go back and double check if I was right. Not about the feelings, of course, but like, is that really, did that part happen, or was that really the time? Or and they might not be important details for other people, but sometimes they brought out really interesting parts of the story. So I'm very much a note taker for sure, but I had no idea it was going to be a book. That was your question.
Yeah.
No, I didn't know until I sort of started putting it together, and I had about 10,000 words or something. And I thought, oh, I think this is something, like this might be something. The editor in me was able to, you know, look at it objectively.
I noticed that you go through some different styles too in the book. Sometimes you have letters in there, sometimes you have poetry, and that. Why did you feel that you wanted to make those kind of style shifts as we went through the memoir?
I feel like my answers, I was like, I didn't make that decision. It just happened. Which is kind of true. Like, I think I just, anyone who really knows me and anyone who's worked with me all these years, I am really not a rule follower. And I didn't study journalism, and I didn't study writing, creative writing. Like I never studied those things. So I don't know what the way you're supposed to do things is. So I just do them how I want to do them. And like sometimes it's a letter, and sometimes it's a poem. And you know, at one part it breaks into a play, like a scene, like a teleplay. I love that part. Like it just makes me happy to mix forms or something. I'm not sure. I'm not really interested in just writing a totally straight narrative. Even the fact that there are so many jumps in time, which some people are bothered by, but I'm not concerned. Like I think, you know, we jump forward and we jump back. There's flash forwards, there's flashbacks. It's mostly chronological, but I just like really being creative. I mean, that's what being an artist is, right? It's just like really being creative and like having the freedom to present your art in however you want to. So that's why I feel like it's not just a memoir. It's like, I don't know, it's a lot of things. It's the thing that I wrote. I don't know. Did that answer?
I think so. I'm curious too about the editing process, because it's when you're dealing with material that's just so personal, how do you whittle that down?
I think that I was editing all along because I am an editor. I spend all day editing other people's scripts usually. So there is, for some reason, which I had no idea until I started doing it, that I was able to remove my self. It's almost like I was producing myself, right? I was editing. So but I'm constantly editing. I mean, I could keep writing that book. You know what I mean? Like I'm always perfecting or changing, or that line, or and because the book is written in those little vignettes, like almost all these little short stories, and it's modular, so it just kept moving all around all the time. And I had hundreds of Post-it notes at first on like 2 closet doors, and would move them all around because there's so many. It's not like you could just do chapter 1 to 13. It was like a million little tiny Yeah, so the editing, I think I was able to edit. I mean, early on, before the podcast and before the book deal with Dundurn, I did have another book deal like 5 years ago. And they were concerned with like the impressionisticness of it, like it was sort of all over the place. And so I did have to like, put it in some kind of order. And that was like a very big challenge. But oh my gosh, I forgot what you asked. This is me.
I think
I'm
you pretty
sorry.
much answered
Probably.
it. It's all good. So I'm not sure how many times the word alone appears in the book, but it's a lot, and obviously it's also in the title of the memoir. How did the meaning of that word evolve over time and also through the book?
Yeah, I mean, the title itself, Alone, a Love Story, I liked it because I feel like it can mean anything. It could mean many things. It has many meanings, and it could be whatever, you, the reader, wants it to be. And one of the things that, I realized over time in real life and in writing the book was that being alone and feeling lonely are two different things. And so there is that sort of awareness that happens in the book where I realize like these are two separate things. And there are times in the book where I refer to them as like not characters or something, almost like the monster called loneliness. And then later the lonely, like capital, the lonely, because it's different. Like people tell you when you're feeling the way I did, like, oh, you just have to learn to love yourself and love like being alone. And I was like, that's not really it, right? Like I love myself. I think I'm great. And I love being alone. I have lots of hobbies and things to do. It's not that I'm bored. It was that, I was used to being around so many people and coming home to a home full of life and like a partner and a child. And then to have that and then to not have that and to come home to like an empty condo, like just overnight was a hard switch. And so it wasn't that I was alone. It was that like I was alone. You know what I mean? That those words are, and they mean different things for different people. But
well, so in the end, what does alone mean for you now versus loneliness?
well, I was able to separate them, which is good because it's important to realize, like, I mean, anyone knows you can be lonely even when you're with other people, right? You can be lonely in a relationship. You can be lonely in a room full of 100 people at a party. So it was realizing that was not like defining me so much. Like it was okay to be lonely and feel lonely, but to be alone, I had to sort of sit with the experience and like basically do exposure therapy, like I had to force myself to come home because for like 6 years I couldn't come home to my own apartment. Like it was a really long time when my kid wasn't here and it was nobody. I couldn't come home to this empty. It was just empty. And the way I got over that was to just come home and be alone, and just deal with it and live through it. And now I'm never alone because, as many of us are in houses with people or we're in a tiny apartment with 3 people now. Now I'm never alone because of the pandemic.
Like, give me some of that alone time now.
Yeah. But even before I had, I did end up falling in love and having a partner. I did learn to love it too. I learned to enjoy my time by myself and to not define myself by this hole that I felt something was missing all the time. A person was missing, the other person. Yeah, but it took me a really long time and it's different for everybody.
And the irony now is that you've written about this and everyone who ever felt alone in situations like this, maybe don't feel that way anymore. You're closer to them. Those readers are maybe closer to each other.
Yeah. That's been one of the most wonderful things that's happened, first with the podcast and then with the book, and and sort of like the real answer at the end of the day to like, why would I put myself out in this like completely raw way, is that like it really helped people, right? For whatever reason, I'm able to articulate less in person right now, but more in writing. I'm able to articulate, these emotional states or these like feelings that some people don't have words for. And I got letters from all over the world. For the first year and a half of the podcast, I got something every single day. Like there was not one day for a year and a half where I didn't open my email or, Facebook Messenger or whatever, and there wasn't a message from somebody. And I still get them still now all the time. And there's somebody like all over the world in crazy different places all over the world just saying like, oh, you explained the way I felt at this time, even if they hadn't gone through the same experience. In fact, usually, how can they, right? Like everyone has a different life experience. And so it wasn't just, I think the thing about this book is that it's not just a book for jilted 40-year-old ladies or whatever. It's really a book, which is also okay. That there are books only for that very specific demographic. I'm not knocking that. But what I mean is that everybody has felt lonely. Everybody has felt alone. Everyone has been betrayed or felt disappointed by people that they love. Like we've all gone through, everyone has felt, like adrift. All those kinds of things are very universal feelings. And so all these letters that we get from people saying like, I could have never explained to my friends what was the matter with me, or I could never explain it, and you've done that for me. Like, thank you. Mm-hmm. Like 90% of the mail starts with thank you. It's just so, like I would never have known that I was doing that. I'll tell you that. Like, no way I could have known that. But what a beautiful side product of the thing, because there's no money in it. So definitely not for the money. It's for this like wonderful mails that say thank you every time. So nice.
Do people ever ask you for love advice? Like, do they kind of treat you like a love expert?
No. I don't. If anyone asks me for love advice based on that book, wow, Adrienne, come on.
You learned a lot of lessons.
I learned a lot of lessons. Sure. I think probably I taught people what not to do. No, nobody has ever asked me love advice. It's more like there's a lot of people saying that like I really helped them, or now they feel like they have some extra, things in the arsenal of like, being able to get through, or they have some hope that it's going to get better, that kind of stuff. Like, so there's no one ever wants my advice. No.
So Michelle, I mean, you're so open about using sex and alcohol to try and get over your heartbreak. A lot of the book is about kind of that relentless search for a good man and a real relationship. I'm wondering, have you ever gotten any negative reaction to that? Because in many ways, those are still like taboo subjects, even though they really should not be.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sometimes, I've seen some people say stuff like, what's wrong with her? She needs a psychologist. It's like, yeah, like I was going to a psychologist, and obviously something was wrong. You know what I mean? We don't just choose to cope with things like alcohol or, sex with strangers. If those were things we've never done before, for example, which is what happened in my case. And it was for a very specific time. And I think, which is why I'm able to write about it, right? I mean, alcoholism is a terrible thing that really affects people over their whole lives. And for whatever reason, it was a very concentrated period of my life where I never drank before. I was 37, and then I drank for every day for a year and a half, and then not again. So I think that's why I'm able to speak about it openly, because it was for a very specific period of time.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely taboo for women to talk about drinking, or for there to be even this idea that women use alcohol as a way of coping. And even more taboo, I think, for women to talk about sex.
Yeah.
And just the fact that they want to have sex at all. And so it felt very scary for me to write about that or put that out there. But I also think it's really important, especially because I make a lot of connections to like the whole dating part, right? Like there I was dating on the edge of 40, right? And it's not great. Like, you know what I mean? I think it's a very different experience than people think it is.
What is
now,
it? Like, what is it versus what you think people think of it?
Well, like, for example, like I had never really dated, right? I was always in one relationship my whole life after another kind of thing. I had 4 relationships. The 4th one was my husband, which was 12 years. So at age 37 to be suddenly dating, and then it's also a world of texting all of a sudden, right? And, you know, things like dick pics and like there's like it's weird, right? Yeah, and there's weird stuff, and like you can't it was just understanding even the language of texting. And I'm not even talking about dating apps or anything, because I didn't really use those. Like this is even when you meet people in the real world, you still mostly are facilitating through text message. So that was very confusing and difficult for someone like me, who's a very like in-person person, and like because I can't judge tone, I couldn't judge, right? And then also I do think especially like in Toronto, it's not probably everywhere, but we are in a culture of hookup culture is, I think, very real. It's not it's not just like a made up thing to scare parents or something. Like it's real, and it doesn't matter what age you are. Like that is just the normal thing to do. And that imbalance, like that weighting of like hookup culture as being the normal state of things, means that, you know, if you are a person who really is looking for real romance or hoping to connect in a way that we might have when we were younger, people my age anyway, it's not the same. Like when I was younger, if you met someone and you liked each other and you went on a couple of dates, like you were going out, like you were a couple, like there was no, you didn't have to have a conversation about exclusivity. That wasn't even a thing. Nobody even knew that word. Like when I was in my 20s, that wasn't a word. Exclusivity, like there was just, but that you have to have that conversation now when you're dating. And when you're a woman who likes to have sex, as there are many women who like having sex, and that's one of, for me, the perks of being in a relationship, is that I can have safe sex that's like good and not scary and not, you know, potentially harmful to me as a woman. And so to not be in a relationship, it just, you feel like you're like thrown to the wolves in a way. So it was really important for me to write from that perspective, because I don't hear that kind of, I don't hear anybody really saying that very much. And I really felt like, because I felt like a sexual being who would like to have sex, every time I went on a date, it was like I'm rolling the dice, right? It's like bad thing could happen to me. And like for men, every time you go on, you know, you sleep with someone new, it's just not the same rolling the dice. Like maybe the sex isn't good, or like maybe they were like weird or something. That's like the most problem. But for women, you know, the person could be amazing and so great and like everything's great, and you could have consented and gone, and then like halfway through, like they just turn into another person, and that's a real thing.
Well, there was that one incident that you recall where you had to pay the guy to leave your place. Yeah. Like what a crazy thing.
Yeah. And yeah. And like, so to be 40 years old and like, I cannot believe I'm in this situation at all. And it's, you know, it's fueled by alcoholism or like alcohol, or it's fueled by low self-esteem. It's fueled by pain, right? The reason to get in those situations in the first place. And like your choice is basically be celibate or, you know, like hope for the best kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. And not to say that every woman is like drinking and that's their fault then, like, you know what I mean? Because whether or not you're drinking or not drinking, sometimes a man can seem great and then they're not great.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no way of knowing.
There's so many, I mean, this was such a tumultuous time of your life. And now you've turned it into like a couple projects, and you're kind of having to revisit it all the time in interviews and all that stuff. Is it hard to keep going back to that and like being in that space again? Or is it now more just like a work and you see it differently?
Yeah, I think it's both of those things. Like, definitely, I think that I protracted my healing process for sure by making the podcast, by writing the book and making the podcast and then editing, you know, all the editing and fine tuning and switching around and thinking and writing extra stuff and performing the podcast. Like, all of that was just constantly, you know, it's the same as anything like positive affirmation or negative affirmation, right? If you keep telling yourself something, then you start to believe it, right?
Mhm.
And so because the book is written in active voice, it's in the voice of the person, of Michelle, like then. And so it was almost like negative reinforcement or whatever, where I'm just affirming this pain cycle. So on a personal level, yes, I think it was at times excruciating, and sometimes I'm tired of talking about it for sure. Not really talking about it. This is good because I enjoy like talking about the nuances more, like the part we just spoke about earlier about dating and what that's like, because I think there were a lot of themes in the book. So I'm interested in talking about those kinds of things, especially the things that women are not used to hearing other women talk about. Like, I am very open about, I hated, you know, being pregnant. I hated having a baby. I love my child, but I did not like having a baby. You know, that I didn't like dating and still I did it, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Like, those are things that I do want to keep talking about. Yeah, but for sure, living through the stories over and over, like the actual specifics of it, it makes it harder to get over it. Yeah, but I'm all right.
Well, we'll get to an update on what's happening with you in a little bit. I did ask you this in our interview yesterday on Radioactive, but we talked about nicknames and all the nicknames in the book, like the scientist becoming the husband, becoming the ex-husband, and Forever 21 and stuff. Do you always refer to your friends or people in your life with nicknames? And did all these people know that you did that?
Did they know that I wrote about them, or did they know that I gave them nicknames?
That they had the nicknames, and maybe even what the nicknames were.
Oh, no, I didn't. I'm kind of like, you know, the kind of person that I didn't tell people. No, I just made the nicknames. They just came to me. Some of them were, in fact, nicknames, like Forever 21, for example. I did used to call him that as a joke all the time, because he was just my buddy that was always, it didn't matter what age we are, he just always seems like he's 21. And so I call him Forever 21. So some were obvious, some are harder. Like, I had to like then give people names, and that was hard. And a lot of the nicknames in the book just come out of whatever I have said about the person just before. So the first time or well, it's not really the first time, but like sort of the line for the man with the white shirt that just precedes is just like, I'm washing a white shirt in the sink, right? Like that's the first line. And so that's where he gets the name, just for because I'm washing this white shirt in the sink. Stuff like that. And big laugh because she has the most enormous laugh of any human being. Like there's just no other way to describe her. And then other people, I had to come up with them. It was really hard. But I didn't tell everybody that they were in the book necessarily.
Was anyone like amused or maybe even annoyed with their nickname when they finally read it?
Oh, no, not to my knowledge. No, I don't think anyone minded their nicknames. But I did, I think it was nice. Like Big Laugh, for example, said like, I didn't remember any of that, and that I helped you in that way, or that I said that, or and she was really, she thought it was, she's like, I have a terrible memory, I don't remember anything. And like I don't remember like that was so important to you. And then other people that they've said similar things, like I didn't realize at the time that made such an impression, or that but no one has complained about their name.
Okay.
No. My favorite thing that happened, one of my favorites, was that I got a text from one of the characters who I hadn't heard from in like a million years. So in the book, he's the character, hot actor. And but it wasn't about himself, because he wasn't even at that part. I guess he was at an earlier part, and he just was like, this text came out of the blue and it just said, crazy guy, what's the matter with him? How can And I thought that was really funny, because it was like one character was commenting on another character. And then, sometimes people text me in real time, like, like they're live tweeting their experience of reading the book, which is fun too.
Let's talk a little bit about the podcast. How, when you're dealing with these two different mediums, writing and podcasting, how different is it to tell this story those two different ways for you?
It was a lot. It's a lot more different. It was different for sure, because we cut out a lot of stuff for the podcast. I mean, there's obvious things like, there's no need for exposition, or, to say, I said excitedly, because you can hear, like, I should be able to translate that through my performance. So there was a lot of just regular culling of that kind of stuff, but also, so the first two seasons were with his producer, Veronica Simmons, did it with me. And the third season was Mark Apollonio, and they're both really great story editors. And it was difficult, and Mark was brutal on me. Like, we would just sit there and I would read the book out loud, kind of thing. And then he would say, I don't know why this is here. And, like,
it's only my life.
And I'm like, what do you mean? It's a good story, And he'd say, yeah, but I don't get it. It doesn't, like, sure. It's just like, wow, the man with the white shirt again. Because you're looking at a different arc, right? Because we had to do 10 episodes of season 1, 10 episodes of season 2. And I never knew if the thing was going to be renewed, because I had to pitch it every time to CBC Radio. Anyone who thinks that I got a good deal or whatever because I work at CBC, I had to do everything the same as anyone else. I had to pitch it, even though it had 4 bajillion downloads the first season. I still had to pitch the season 2. And the editing process is different, because it's audio, and the order of a lot of things are in a different order to make the narrative arc of a season, to make a narrative arc of 25-minute podcast, because each episode is around 25 minutes, to make that make sense. It's a little bit different. And then things like the teleplay, like the script of the husband and wife in bed together talking. Like I couldn't make that script happen out loud, so we had to come up with a different way of doing it. Things like that.
Yeah.
What an experience though. Like, but I really couldn't have done that alone. Like I needed another producer. I'm a very experienced producer, and I mixed half of the podcast myself. But
Yeah. The feedback, do you find it's more maybe intense from people who listen versus those who read, or maybe it's the other way around?
so far, I think the feedback, there was a lot more feedback, yes, from the podcast, from strangers, like just total strangers from all over America. And like I was saying, all over the world, all over. It was like the podcast was #1 in Australia for some reason, on the podcast charts there. So like Australians write me all the time, but I don't know if they have the book. Like, so it's funny. It's a different medium. And then there are tons of people who love books who would never listen to a podcast. So it's an interesting, different in terms of feedback.
Yeah. I was thinking, just because podcasts can be so intimate, it's like right in your ears. There are some sections where you're almost in like a whisper with what you're saying, and that feels just so close. So I was wondering if that elicited like stronger or more personal responses from people being
Yes.
heard your story that way.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the podcast made people think that I am their friend. And I don't mean that with any disrespect. But like there is a familiarity that they have with me. So, but I don't have that with them. And so people write me with an extreme openness or, forwardness sometimes. Yeah. and that was okay too. Like, and I wrote every single person back for the first 2-3 years, but like now I'm way behind.
Yeah.
And some, and a couple of people, like one person I've become like a pen pal with, because we did connect. People do connect. Yeah. Like there's quite a few, there's like a few people that I became friends with, even though I've never met these people.
Yeah.
But I do think, when you are right in people's ears in the very closely mic'd way that I was, which was part of my idea, right? Like I wanted to, podcasts are always very intimate, but I really felt like that people should feel like they were right in the movie with me. Like, and I wanted it to feel like a movie also, even though it was for your ears. And so, even though that's why I had so many voices, right? I had to do Michelle voice, narrator voice, drunk Michelle, drunk inside Michelle voice. Like there's a lot of, right. And then I did everyone else's voices too. So it was a good challenge for me, I think, artistically. And I think all of that rawness of it and the emotional authenticity of it is like what really draws people to it. And the book, although yes, I'm not whispering in your ear. It's the same voice. My voice is my voice. My writing voice is my writing voice. Yeah.
What is your take on forgiveness? I saw an interview that you did talking about this subject a bit and how it was revelatory. One day someone told you, sometimes it's okay not to forgive. So yeah, what was your journey a bit there? Yeah.
Oh, wow. I forgot about that. That's great. I think at the very beginning, like right after the bomb, like right after I found out about the infidelity and I knew that my marriage was over, like this was not going to continue. But, our daughter was not even 5 years old. And for me, any way of us moving forward and like raising our child together, like was predicated on me forgiving him. This is me at the time. And I really thought that it was important that I had to forgive him. And then after a while, I think what happens sometimes is when we forgive people, it's really for us. It's not for them, right? It's like it's not that I martyred myself or that people are martyring themselves. It's like, oh, but I am the holy forgiver, and I have done this selfless act of forgiving you, and like he didn't want me to forgive him, first of all, right? Because he didn't forgive himself. Like some things are unforgivable, maybe even, but that doesn't mean you can't still work together. And so it took me a while. There was a while where anything then moving forward that he did that would upset me, then I'd be like, how could he do this? Because like I've forgiven him, right? Like as if forgiveness was this gift I gave him. And forgiveness can't be a gift. Like it either is or it isn't. Yes. And then that person, very smart young lady, she said, has it ever occurred to you that you don't have to forgive him for this? And it hadn't, right? Because I was really on my like, I must forgive him. And then once I didn't have to forgive him, like once I really started thinking about it, it was wonderful, actually. Like it was very releasing. I should have wrote all that in the book, but I didn't. That
Maybe
isn't in the book. I mean, partially. There's like some of that is, but yeah, sometimes we think that we're doing something for others, but it's really for us. And it wasn't actually doing anything for either of us, for me to hold so on to this like purity of forgiveness. So
right. I still have a lot of questions, but I want to open it up to anyone who's with us who has a question for Michelle. So I'm watching my little chat window right now closely. So if anybody has a question, feel free to type it into the Q&A and it'll get to me. So while we're waiting for the first question, let's continue on then. I understand that the film and TV rights to your story were sold to Sienna Films in 2018. So I'm wondering, is this on its way to like making it onto the small or maybe big screen at some point?
Well, I mean, who knows? The way that whole when stories are optioned and things, it's a whole other thing. So it's one of those things where you can sell the optioning rights and then you wait forever. So it's really up in the air. I think it's that one in fact has expired. So it's possible, maybe, but it could be like 10 years from now.
I mean, would you like to see it that way? Who would play you?
Yeah, right. I don't know. I can't even imagine. Yeah, I can't imagine. It would be very different, to have to make it for a TV or movie or something like that. And that would be okay. Like it would have to be totally out of my hands. And I think that's why they say it's like based on, because there's no way it can be. I have no idea how anybody would be able to do it.
Yeah.
Who could be me though? Really? I don't know.
Hey, you can dream right now. It can be anybody. Would you ever want to be you in a TV version or something?
I don't think I'm that kind of performer. No. I mean, obviously, whoever would be like a really skinny, younger version of me. Isn't that how they cast things? Yeah, I don't know. No, I would never want to. I'm not interested in that part, but on my own, actually. I just want to keep writing books and making audio.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so first question here from Tamara. Why did the podcast end?
Oh, the podcast ended where the book ended. And I really felt that was really all I could do. I mean, 3 seasons seemed good. It was 28 episodes. It's not my day job, so I really had to choose a moment where this story would stop. Otherwise, like it could just keep going because it's a living document, which is what I say at the end of the podcast. It's like, I mean, this is my life, and I was tired of talking about my life so openly. And I feel like it ended there in a place that it wasn't like a nice tied bow. I liked that. There wasn't a wedding. There wasn't like whatever. I didn't fall in love. Like, you know, it was just, it ended with me going like, this isn't perfect, but it's better than when you started this, you know? And I kind of like the idea of it not wrapping up perfectly, because life rarely wraps up perfectly.
Yeah.
So that's why tomorrow.
Okay. This one's from Jason, and there are actually 3 questions here. So the first one is, if you had to choose between doing the podcast or writing the book, which would you choose and why?
If I had to choose, I loved writing the book, and that was the thing I did first, Jason. So I guess I would choose that. What ended up happening was that the first book deal I had, it wasn't quite, there were some challenges. And so I decided not to sign the deal. And then I thought like, God, but this story really needs to get out there. Like I really felt compelled to share this with everyone. And so that's when I came up with the idea of making a movie for your ears. And then I made the podcast. But the podcast was very hard to make compared to writing a book. I think writing a book is super easy compared to making a podcast. I mean, because the podcast it's a lot. You have to pitch, you have to convince people, you have to do all this like, I had to perform it, I had to mix it, I had to find all the music, I had to work with other producer on it. Yeah, I guess I choose the book, Jason. Although I loved making the podcast.
The other questions from Jason here. What do you think you're going to write next? And would you do another memoir?
Probably not another memoir. However, for the past year, I have been writing a book. And I like to think of it as like mostly true. It's a bunch of mostly true stories, but it's not really. And what I've done is I've taken a lot of my notes and stories and ideas and thoughts of a lot of different things, not just my own life, and I've fictionalized them. So there's grains of truth. So I've written already a whole other book, Jason. So we'll see if anybody wants it. I don't know. But,
yeah. Maybe before we move on, any advice on navigating the publishing part of things?
No, that part is so hard. I didn't know anything about publishing. I mean, I've spent 24 years working in radio. And before that, I worked at Swiss Chalet. So like, I didn't know anything about publishing. So my main advice would be to get a literary agent if you can, because it's a really weird, totally different thing that I would never have been able to navigate on my own. Yeah. But I mean, I can give advice on writing, which is to do it how you want. Don't worry about what other people are doing. So for example, I don't care how other memoirs are written. I wrote mine how I wanted it to be written. And I didn't worry about like, oh, is there usually a poem or a letter in the middle of a memoir? Like I didn't. So I would say to everybody, don't worry about what other people are doing and allow yourself to express yourself however you want. And that's the same thing I did with the podcast. People were always asking me like, oh, have you heard this podcast? Have you ever heard this podcast? And they would cite like other podcasts about like sad 40-year-old ladies. And I'm like, no, those people have nothing to do. It has nothing to do with like, I didn't want to listen to those. I wanted to just make what I wanted to make. And I do think that's why the material connects with people so much, because I didn't worry about what other people are doing.
Yeah.
Just do you, as they say.
Yes. Do you. What about if there isn't too much to say about publishing, getting the literary agent, was that an easy, okay process for you?
It actually was easier than I thought.
Yeah.
But I mean, I just did my research and sent out I sent it to the one person I wanted, and I got that person. But
nice.
I don't think that that's probably, the same for everybody. And I did get the agent after, like, I had the podcast, so that helped, right? Or while the podcast was happening. Because the first book deal I got on my own without an agent and without the podcast. Like, it had nothing to do. Like, that just was luck also. So I don't have good advice, because they were both luck or whatever. Not just luck. You can't just be all luck. You also have to have the goods.
Yeah, of course. Yes. Yeah. Okay, well, so let's get to what is life like for you now?
Just life in general. Yeah. Well, since the podcast, where it ends in the podcast, it did go on, like that for another year or so. And then what ended up happening is that one of the characters in the book and the podcast, who was my friend and lover in the book, we ended up falling in love, but like a year and a half later. Yeah. And and now we're engaged, and he's from Alberta.
Nice.
So there you go. Yeah, so that was a surprise. Is one of those things where, in fact, last year, at the beginning of last year, he had moved back to Alberta. And before he left, he kept saying, like, do you think I should go? And I was like, yeah, why are you going to stay here? Like, we were just friends. And then once he left, then I went to visit him in Edmonton. And then we were like, oh, he was like, I made a huge mistake. I never should have left Toronto. Like, I love you. And then I was like, what? No.
Wow.
That's the short version of it. But basically, it was one of those things. Like, even before he left, he had said, like, what if this is a mistake? And I said, I think we would have fallen in love by now. Like, we've been hanging out for a year and a half. Like, I thought really we would have, but sometimes things don't turn out in the exact way that you expect them to. And it was right in the moment when I was like really comfortable with being on my own and comfortable with the way things were, and really in a good place. And that's sort of like when it all fell into place. Just like they say.
It
was exactly how everybody says.
I don't mean to be snoopy, but is this Farm Boy?
Uh-huh. It is. An Alberta exclusive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It is. He is like a wonderful, and in fact, he is the kindest partner I've ever had in my entire life. Like I've never had such a wonderfully emotionally intelligent and like, I don't know. It's just really great. It's just really great.
So even though you have been stuck together through COVID, it's still great.
Right. Yeah. For almost the whole time that we've been living together has been in COVID almost in a way. So, yeah. No, we get along fine. And it's tight quarters. It's an apartment. And then when my kid is here, she's 13 now. So it's like 3 people in an apartment with 1 bathroom. Oh my goodness. And like, and I work here. We're all here all the time. But no, we get along great. And he's a wonderful cook. And yeah. And we went at Christmas and New Year's. We were up near Grand Prairie, up there. So it was beautiful. I love Alberta.
Oh, there are a lot of beautiful parts to Alberta. Come on back anytime.
Yeah. Once this whole pandemic's over. Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess our time's up. It's 4:59. Thank you so much for being with us, Michelle, and being so open as always to all the questions. And it's a great book. We look forward to your next book or podcast or TV, movie,
knows?
whatever it is in the future.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. It was really nice talking to you.
And thank you to everyone who joined us for this LitFest 2020 event. Of course, there are a ton of other LitFest 2020 events to come for the whole next week, so check them all out. And if you have a minute, turn your radio dial to 93.9 FM, 740 AM. Check out Radioactive, 3 to 6 on weekdays. I think we have a lot of fun on the program, so we'd love it if you joined us at some point. And yeah, have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.